Have you ever wondered, being a musician or a music student, why you play the way you do? Where your style comes from? Why you play Beethoven the way you play Beethoven, Chopin, Schumann, Brahms? And what does it mean? Your Beethoven style, your Brahms flavor. Yes, why exactly do we play the way we do? Is it because you learned the real Beethoven practice in music school or conservatory? You've been taught to play Chopin as he did, like Brahms? Really? Are you sure about that? Could it be true we actually learned all of those different styles through our teachers who just passed a tradition that goes back centuries? Or not?
Listen to how different times have changed, and also just the types of interpretations you can have in the same piece of music.
It's so creative.
That's pretty clear and accurate, I'd say, but ask yourself, would you really want to go back all the way up to Beethoven, hear him sing the theme of his Fifth Symphony while the ink still is drying? I hear you all say yes, but what if I told you it probably sounded more like this?
You would get murdered for playing like that.
I know, but the real question is, would you want to go back in time? Are you ready to meet the Beethoven that you just take for granted every morning? It might very well be a different person and a different musician than you thought he was, as it might be a different Chopin you will shake hands with. Are you ready for that?
Yeah.
Milstein, Grimio, Heifetz, all those artists. The great artists you see today all listen to these people and still changed so much.
That's so interesting.
It seems that many people who have difficulties accepting the idea of the WBMP, the whole beat metronome practice, often refer to the early recordings as the ultimate proof that also musicians back in the 18th and early 19th century played extremely fast, even much faster than we hear on those recordings and much faster than we play today. So welcome guys to this channel where we share not only recordings, soon reaching number 300 by the way, but also invite you to our journey in reconstructing, or at least attempt to reconstruct, what composers had in mind when writing their music. What did Beethoven hear moments before he started writing down the presto of his Fifth Symphony? Moments before starting the Allegro con brio of his opus 20/38. All questions that are as much fascinating as impossible to solve, since Beethoven isn't around anymore to tell, to play, to teach, to show us the way. I sometimes wonder though, if we as a musical society would be ready for such a Beethoven event. We seem to have no problem in talking about aspects of articulation, phrasing, instrument choice, but the moment we enter the field of tempo reconstruction, suddenly many feel like being trapped in a cage with no escape. It seems that knowing what the composer had in mind, at least his tempo for his music, makes us afraid. Makes us afraid of losing exactly that freedom to do whatever we want with music of the past. Not that we really lose that freedom, of course not. Beethoven nor Chopin are around anymore to slap us in the face. But when we see that solution, a solution that really works, we somehow remind ourselves that we do play music of Beethoven, of Chopin, of Mendelssohn, and that playing their music comes with the price of at least trying to do justice to their authentic wishes. never be able to reconstruct exactly that. But since changing tempo changes everything, a tempo reconstruction seems to pinpoint us to a wall that many still seem not to be ready for. And so all kinds of counter-arguments have passed to deflect from this metronome problem that, as I believe, has been solved in principle here. One of the so-called counter-arguments that I never fully understood, yet mentioned a lot here on this channel, are the historical recordings. The lead argument is always that those recordings absolutely were a copy-paste reflection of the way their teachers taught those performers, as if performers always have been faithful to their education.
How was your relation with your teacher?
Awful, because
awful,
I would
okay.
do everything opposite from my teachers, from what they would say. They were quite upset with me.
But as interesting as those recordings are, I never understood that argument for several reasons. First of all, how can we know that those musicians still played exactly as 50 or 100 years before them? Many of those musicians made those recordings at pretty high age, in some cases over half a century later than their lesson with that particular teacher or composer. And furthermore, the tempi they take are indeed fast, but do not take the authentic tempo indications serious. In most cases, they fall short in speed by considerable margins. So in other words, if those recordings prove anything, it is the fact that they did not care about the original intentions of the composers they played. Remember that famous Liszt quote I brought to you, in which he said to play like a charlatan in public, since he had to. Musicians back then, as well as today, are under a lot of pressure to shine as athletes, to do astonishing things.
It was all about, at the end, about winning competitions. It was almost like a sport.
But most importantly, something that many seem to forget, we have in front of our eyes the proof to debunk that argument once and for all. Since, contrary to those musicians back then, we do have their recordings, and contrary to their intention, we do claim to have interest in reconstructing the authentic idea of the composer. If those recordings would reflect exactly that, why do we not play any more like them? Of course, when I say that, it might not make much impression, but here you have two young musicians, free from all tension around tempo research, saying this.
Guys, this is like 10 years. I'll say 15 years ago when Eddie and myself were always listening to these people.
Yeah.
Milstein, Grumio, Heifetz, all these artists. The great artists you see today all listen to these people and still changed so much.
It's so interesting.
So in their video, they discuss old recordings in which old school is defined as not too old, I would say.
Old school?
Yeah, old school.
I think so.
Old school, I think so.
OG. What does old school mean?
It means roughly 1950s
Yeah.
to 1980s, around
Yes.
that area.
Brett and Eddie start the video discussing 3 different recordings of a Bach partita and then go on to discuss 2 recordings of Jules Massenet's famous meditation, which is even more interesting for the point of this video. They serve a recording by Maxim Vengerov, a modern performer, with the conclusion that is not so surprising.
Deep. This is kind of what we would
Probably play like.
play like today, or what we would want to play like.
And after that, a recording of the old school is served, Misha Elman. And this example is super interesting, since contrary to many old recordings where musicians played music that already for them was historic, Elman was born in 1891. And Massenet died only in 1912. The recording used here is made in 1962, but still, it is very different of what we do today. See Brett's and Eddie's reaction.
There was a slap in the face. Bow!
So wake up, guys. This is their pop music.
Bro, it just went. These are more.
Yeah, like that.
They do that a lot more back then. This kind of.
Ah, yeah. The portamento
Yeah.
and like the hitting the string.
Oh, that gliss.
And then it's also so matter of fact.
Yeah. Yeah.
The music says this, we just do this.
Do, 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 do. Oh, dude, it's like a high rev engine.
Did he take a few more bows than necessary?
Yeah.
Also, back in the days, they did play a lot more at the tip.
Yeah.
Now we're using a bit more of a frog.
Yeah.
I know that also this video will trigger many to fill the comments below this video with black and white responses that ignores the simple logic that going back in time 200 years should prepare us for some major shock. As if there is the slightest chance that musicians in 1820 played exactly the way we still do today. As if we still play as our teacher, he as his teacher, she as her teacher, and so generations and generations back. In that logic, I am a student of J.S. Bach. Since my teacher Jacques van Noordmessen studied with Marie-Claire Alain, she studied with Marcel Dupré, he with Charles-Marie Widor, Widor with Jacques-Nicolas Lemmes, Lemmes with Adolf Friedrich Hesse, who studied with Christian Heinrich Rink, who studied with Johann Christian Kittel, who was a student of J.S. Bach. Yet I don't claim to play like Bach because of this line of tradition. Even not like Widor, not even like Dupré, not like Marie-Claire Alain, and if my teacher Jacques van Noordmessen would be still alive today, I would have a long list of performance aspects to discuss with him that I do very different than him. Progress of art is something that still is close to our way of looking back to history. We might know differences, we might realize them, yet applying them, becoming, or at least trying to become someone of the past, as maybe essentially might be our job after all as a musician, is still a long way to go. If we even don't play anymore like our teachers, if recordings of 1962 feel like different on so many aspects, how would we even think to still play according to what Beethoven had in mind?
Listen to how different times have changed, and also just the types of interpretations you can have in the same piece of music.
So creative.
I think it's also, if you learn an instrument, it's one of the best ways to inspire your mind to think outside the box.
True. This definitely did. It just hit me. I'm like, whoa. Anyway,
Yeah.
please like and subscribe.
I did, and I liked your video because it's an important message. Thank you for that. Hey Sibo, what shall we do with tempo research? Let me see what solution you have. Let me see your solution. There it is. That's whole beat movement, right? That's a whole beat movement. Here's a camera, huh?